Okay. Now we tried to, in terms of the budget, in terms of the session. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't we try to reduce some of these, say, exemptions, and but we weren't really that successful until, like, I think the last day in terms of the penny. Correct? So, sorry.
Kind of bag on that front. So, we hear a lot about exemptions and credits, and there's about $7.5 billion in exemptions and credits in Louisiana. That's a lot, $7.5 billion. Now, we've got kind of what I would consider a broken tax code for a number of reasons. It's relatively high and uncompetitive, and over the years, instead of fixing it, we put exemptions and credits over it to try to mask some of the uncompetitive parts of it. But of that $7.5 billion in exemptions and credits, people hear that number and assume it's all business credits. The reality is 1.7 of those are corporate credits. And about 500 million of that is the S-Corp double tax exemption, which basically means those dollars are taxed in personal income as compared to corporate. So it's relatively a small number of it's a true corporate tax exemption. Most of those exemptions come in income, personal income, and sales. For instance, the largest exemption we have on our books today is the FIT, the federal income tax deduction. That's the deduction that allows all individuals to deduct their federal taxes from their state taxes. That's the largest deduction we have. If you put that plus a couple of those other large ones, the excess itemized, the inventory tax credit, which is one we've talked about, is a fairly large one. There's a couple of them up there that are the big guys, and then there's like this host of like 300 other little small ones that stack up to create a big ones. But we never really talk about a lot of the ones that aren't business oriented. We just talk about that $1 billion and feel like that's going to solve all the problems, but that's not really the true challenge we face in our exemption budget.
Now, in terms of the federal exemption, I talked to Mr. Moeller yesterday, and he mentioned, I think that there would be, say, the state would be able to get roughly around $1 billion, 900 million, $1 billion, if we were to do away with that exemption. Or correct me if I'm wrong, that exemption or deduction from the personal income tax.
Yeah, so on the FIT is an exemption that applies for individuals and business entities, okay? And so it's roughly $1 billion. Jan's right, it's between $900 and $1 billion on both of those two. Now, what people forget is that in this session that just ended, that there is a bill. Walt Leger had a bill. There are two bills, actually. And it would have repealed the FIT deduction for business. That goes to the ballot this fall. If that ballot initiative passes, corporate entities will no longer have the FIT to deduct. And if that ballot passes, it will drop the corporate rate to 6.5%. Right now, we have a 5, 6, 7, 8 corporate rate. And so if that bill passes, the FIT deduction is off the books, and that corporate rate drops to 6.5%. And depending on where you pay today, some companies may win, some may lose. It'll save the state about $30 million. On the personal FIT side, though, that's still in the books. That was not touched this fall. Now, the Tax Foundation and some folks have said we should take a look at the FIT, and if we remove that for individuals, lower the personal income tax rate to make it a more flat and fair rate. And that discussion probably will come up in the next fiscal session. I don't think anyone is out there advocating that if you remove the FIT, you simply take the entire dollar and put it back into government. Everyone has pretty much said if you're going to remove the FIT, you should lower rates and make it a more flat and fair rate, whether you're doing it for individuals or for companies.
I see. When I did talk to Jean Moeller yesterday, and I asked him about the potential special session, and asked him, well, what might the Louisiana Budget Project be, say, promoting? What kind of policies would they be promoting? Let me go ahead and actually play his response.
The way you move an economy forward is to have an educated, well-trained population that's able to, perform the jobs that we have, but also create the jobs of the future. And if you're not doing a good job educating your people, you're doing long-term damage to your economy.
So if we're looking at possibly $800 million in the hole starting July, and let's just assume we do have a special session, what, say, would the Louisiana Budget Project, how would y'all recommend that we deal with a budget shortfall of, say, $800 million?
Well, I think one of the places you absolutely have to look is the personal income tax side. That's the side that didn't get any attention during this fiscal session. The two main, the state gets revenue from a lot of areas, but by far the two largest sources of revenue for state government are the sales tax and the individual income tax. And we are right now maxed out on the sales tax. We're the highest in the country. We're nowhere close to the highest on individual income tax. And one of the reasons we've had these budget problems is because in 2007 and 2008, when Louisiana had billion-dollar surpluses, we passed more than $800 million in income tax cuts for middle and upper income taxpayers. So I think one of the things we have to do, and legislators need to be willing to do, is look to personal income taxes and frankly make some very tough decisions. If you're not willing to raise income taxes on middle and upper income taxpayers, on people making $75,000, $100,000, $500,000 a year, if you're not willing to ask those families to pay a little bit more, then you're going to have to ask people to, at the other side of the economic spectrum, to say, I'm sorry, we can't afford to have a hospital for you when you get sick. We can't afford to have a college for your kids to go to.
So that's what he said. Obviously, nobody wants income taxes to increase. But anyway, your response.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts on that is, last session, we spent pretty much the entire session talking about, revenue increases to help solve the budget challenge. And obviously, we spent the last 2 months roughly in a special session focused again on additional revenue increases to address it. Collectively, over those 2 sessions, just from the business, community alone, we've looked at it. In the next couple of years, it's going to be over $2 billion. And so, I know from the business side, we want to do our part. I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there who want to do their part. But I do think it's worthy of, instead of automatically assuming we've got to just get through this session and get to a next special to raise more revenue, I think we should put a laser-like focus on this general session and try to do everything we can on the spending side, on the budget structure side, on the entitlement reform side. And let's really kick the tires pretty hard on those 3 things. And then if we get out of the general session, we got to talk about additional revenue, that might be the more appropriate time. This $800 million gap we hear about, again, we haven't seen all the fiscal notes from last week's session, so we got to make sure that's accurate. But let's say it is somewhere around 800. The reality is that $2 billion number is the number used to fund a continuation budget. There have to be some efficiencies in that continuation budget. So I think we got to draw that number down using good old-fashioned elbow grease on the budget structure, spending and entitlement side first. If we go on the back end of that and revenue might be needed, let's make that case and let's have that discussion then. But I think the people deserve a laser-like focus on spending and structure first.
So why wasn't that done over the last 25 days? I mean, was it just not enough time to do that? Was it the call?
Well, yeah. So what happens is, when you're in a special session, you know this, but just for those who are listening may not, when you're in a special session, there's 2 ways a special session can happen. Either a legislature can call themselves into a special session, and if they do, they can decide the parameters of what's allowed to be discussed, or a governor can call a legislature in. And when he does that, he does it through what's called a call. It's an executive order that's put out that puts specific parameters of what can be debated and what can be debated and what cannot. That call put out by the governor was very specific to certain types of taxes. And that's why the session was all about that. Spending reform, entitlement reform, some of these other issues were not germane to the call, so it wasn't allowed. In fact, you saw even the House legislation, Republican delegation, I think sent a letter, the Senate and House delegation sent a letter to the governor asking for some of these other issues to be discussed either in that session or the next general session. So there was a thirst to get into some of that, but it was not germane to the last session. So that's why it was not discussed there.
Okay, but it can be, as you mentioned, it can be discussed in the next 3 months.
Next 3 months, it can be discussed. Yeah. And the next 3 months, it's restricted on new taxes. You can't really go there in the next session. So we've got this little ping pong action. The last month and a half was all about taxes. The next couple months should be all about spending reform and budget reform. And I think hopefully maybe at the end of that, we'll get to maybe kind of an improved product that we can, start to build off of.
So to close it out, let me ask you this, and that is, and I know that you touched upon it, but if there's, say 3 items that you believe that we can really get into to really make say, a difference in terms of scrubbing, other than maybe shutting down the fourth floor?
Right. No bumper
What,
stickers.
no, the education department from Buddy Romer and all, but seriously, those things that you think that can be done, that you're really going to be pushing for, what would they be?
From my perspective,
Mm-hmm.
I think we should spend the next couple months focused on real reforms that may not even pay immediate dividends, but will pay long-term dividends and get us out of this chronic annual budget deficit we never seem to get out of. I personally do not think you can tax your way into a scenario where we get out of this annual shortfall. Let's say you went out and raised $3 billion in taxes this year. I think next year government would grow to fill that balloon and say, you know what, we probably need a little bit more. We have got to find a way to fix the spending side to get us out of this recurring annual piece. And so what I would do is a couple of things. I would unlock as many dedications as we can so that those dollars become more eligible for the legislature to reappropriate to things like healthcare, higher ed, or now waivers or things like that. That's one thing. Two, I would look at every board and commission we have, and if there's any duplication or if there's any way to do it more efficiently, I would consolidate those and do away with some of those. There's a lot of oversight there. The other piece is I would give each agency a measured reduction number and force them to submit a plan. And if you don't like that plan, the legislature needs to rip it up and throw it in the trash can and say, give me another one. That's not acceptable. And continue to have that good, strong oversight process and force them to give real reductions that we can implement and not scare tactic reductions that just scare people and force them to become uncomfortable. I would do those things. And then lastly, pension reform, smart on crime, incarceration reform, and Medicaid reform, and possibly even civil service reform. I would look at those things, find ways where we can drive some efficiencies there that may not reap benefits immediately, but over the out years will get us out of this recurring deficit trap that's been plaguing us since the 80s.
Well, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, fun's one word for it. I don't know, but we'll see.
Well, yeah, we have to see. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. And again, kudos to the technological advancement you're using here. It's pretty cool.
Thank